Joining us now is Armand White, a film critic whose work has appeared in New York Press, Film Comment, and the City Sun. His writing has been discussed by publications such as the New York Times, Time Magazine, and on websites and blogs all over the internet. He has a new book out called Keep Moving, The Michael Jackson Chronicles. It's available at his website. Armand White, thanks so much for joining us this evening on the Slash Filmcast.
Well, thanks for asking me. I'm happy to be here.
Now, Mr. White, can you tell us a little bit about this book, Keep Moving, The Michael Jackson Chronicles?
It's a collection of articles that I have written over the years about Michael Jackson, starting with articles that I published in the City Sun back in the 80s and in other publications from about the time of the Bad album, which is 1987, up to his late work in the late 90s. And it takes a perspective on Michael Jackson's work that regards him as a serious artist, and also the change that happened in his music during the 90s when he became a more explicitly political artist. And my hope with this book is to counter the kinds of mainstream media demonization that has always attended Michael Jackson in the mainstream media. It's a critical approach to his work, and critical in the sense of an aesthetic interpretation of his work. It's not about a tabloid figure, it's about an artist.
Well, very interesting, and I believe the book is available at resistanceworks.blogspot.com, yes?
Well, yes, resistanceworks, wdc.blogspot.com.
Very cool,
and
sir.
It can be ordered through that website.
Very cool. So people should check that out. Now, let's get down to the movie at hand, Christopher Nolan's Inception.
Okay.
Mr. White, I'm wondering if you could just give us a general impression of what you thought of this movie, and then we'll sort of talk about some of the finer points. What did you think of the movie overall? Did you feel it was an enjoyable romp?
Well, I try to avoid enjoyable romps whenever I can, frankly, by anyone and at any time. I don't like romps at the movies. I think Christopher Nolan has made I think he's made a movie that can pass pretty much for a video game, in the sense that it's about moments of violence that can't be taken seriously, but that are meant to be enjoyed. And so when I say I think he's made a successful video game, I don't really mean that as a compliment. I think it's kind of I think it is a diminution of what cinema art is. But it's clearly in his approach to cinema as a kind of game, or even as a kind of romp, he's found an audience. It's just that I think that making movies that are romps or are games is not a way to make works of art.
You know, it's interesting you say that, because in your review of Inception at the New York Press, at nypress.com, you discuss how you compare the film unfavorably to Neveldine Taylor's Gamer. And so I can kind of understand what you're saying. You say here, I'm just going to quote, Nolan never, let me read from the last paragraph here. Reality is neither perceived nor penetrated in Inception. Cobb's dream obsession suggests pop culture addiction, mirroring how consumers habitually escape reality with video games and movies, but Nolan never critiques this as Neveldine Taylor did in Gamer. And I wonder, so I understand that point about how Gamer is in some way a satire of the negative elements that you can also find in this movie. But isn't there something to be said about how successful the world building is in a movie like Inception?
Well, I guess something can be said for it in the same way you can say something for Lego sets, or for 3D puzzles. To me, it's that kind of achievement, which I don't regard as a cinematic achievement. It's an achievement, I guess, of craft and of technology.
Mm-hmm. It's interesting that you mentioned that, though. I mean, just because Gamer set out to be a film that critiqued that whole game violence thing, Inception never really did. It has those elements, but it's trying to do something else.
Okay, well, perhaps it's trying to be something else. I I don't respect its attempt to be something else. I don't respect its attempt to, or Nolan's attempt to, I think, exploit the video game impulse that exists in our culture. I think that impulse it's out there, it's widespread, many people enjoy it, but video games, as far as I've experienced them, lack an edifying element. They don't tell us anything about human nature. I feel they don't tell us anything about human experience, and they're just games. And although that may be what Nolan sets out to do, I find that deficient. What I admire in Neveldine Taylor is their critical impulse, their satirical impulse. They certainly also understand that video games is part of our culture, that our culture is in some ways addicted to games, addicted to romps, addicted to a kind of hedonistic entertainment. But the movie Gamer, what impressed me about Gamer is that Neveldine Taylor, they have an adult understanding that this is belittling to the human soul, and they are satirists. I like to call them apocalyptic satirists because they will go to the farthest end of showing human degradation, contemporary human degradation. But they believe that something is lost there. They believe that damages the soul. I think that makes their work weighty. I don't find that kind of weight in what Christopher Nolan does.
But aside from the fact that Christopher Nolan kind of employs the video game conventions that you seem to deride, what about the sort of other weighty elements that Nolan is grasping towards? For example, the idea that ideas can change the very core of a person. The idea that even within dreams, people can find, or even in imagined realities, people can find some kind of catharsis. What do you make of those ideas? I mean, those are certainly just as weighty as some of the elements that Neveldine Taylor satirized in their films. And I mean, do you just find him ineffective at making them, or do you not find them interesting points?
I have to say that I don't see that idea worked out in the film. I guess there is something like that spoken by characters in the film, but I don't feel it in the art itself. As it is spoken in the film, to me, it's gobbledygook. It's just talk. It's just blather. I don't feel it. I don't think it's not conveyed in a way that forces me to take the notion seriously. It simply seems to be a premise for the game he wants to build and have his audience enjoy.
Can I ask you how you feel about this movie as it fits into kind of the Christopher Nolan's other works? I mean, I don't believe you're a fan of The Dark Knight. Is that correct?
No. As a filmmaker, I would have to say that he constantly disappoints me. He does what he does, and that's certainly his right as an artist. I just always find it deficient. He doesn't handle the human experience, the spiritual experience, or the mental or psychological experience that human beings know in a way that I find interesting. And he does this constantly. I'm putting it to you that way because I know some people think that, well, since I feel this way about him, I shouldn't review his films. Well, I am going to review his films because I'm a film critic. And I go to Christopher Nolan's films the way I go to any filmmaker's films. I'm waiting to see what he has done this time, always with the hope that I will be impressed. I go to movies always with that hope that Cocteau expressed in Orpheus, where he says, all he wants from an artist is to astonish me. I give that opportunity every time. I have that. I'm waiting for that every time I go to the movies. It doesn't matter who makes them. I want to be astonished. I don't want to have my time wasted. I don't want to sit in a movie so frustrated. Nolan has not yet given me that. In fact, he's given me quite the opposite of astonishment. He generally gives me a kind of depressing, repellent nihilism.
Devendra, were you going to say something?
Yeah, I was actually going to say, because judging from the Inception review that you wrote, Armand, that you said that Christopher Nolan doesn't have a born filmmaker's natural gift for detail, composition, and movement. But that's interesting. I mean, that's how your review starts. That's interesting to me, though, because are you assuming that it's a born talent? Or it sounds like, at least as soon as you started this review, that you were judging Nolan, Nolan the person, and perhaps not the movie. Did you have that idea of him before you even saw Inception?
Well, wait a minute. Think about what you're saying. It's how I started the review. I don't write my reviews with no thought in my head. That may be the way I started the review. It's not the way I approach the review. Consider this. I approach the review after having seen the movie and after having thought about it. And I write my reviews in a way that I hope can be read enjoyably and with some interest. So I'm starting an argument that way. Doesn't mean that that's my first thought. I'm beginning the construction of an argument that way, and I begin the argument after having seen the film and after having thought about it. So it's not that I start with a prejudice. I start with a response, and that's in the review is a response from the very first word of the review. It's a response. It's not a prejudice.
And I'm sorry.
So so if you want to know about the idea of a born filmmaker,
yeah,
I believe there is such a thing. Just as I believe there are people who are born singers, because I'm not one of those. But Prince is, Whitney Houston is, Dietrich Fischer-Dieskau is a born singer. Singers can be trained, but some people are born with the gift. I think, and it's easy to find artists who are born with a gift. Bertolucci is a born filmmaker. I would reckon from the first piece of film by Brian De Palma that was ever exhibited in public, you can see that he's a born film. He's got it. He's doing things in a distinctive way. It's a gift, and not everybody's got the gift.
Let me ask you about. Okay, to repeat, you say here again. I don't want to make you feel like we're just taking this out of context. But so please stop me if you feel that way. But you say Christopher Nolan doesn't have a born filmmaker's natural gift for detail, composition, and movement. But on the evidence of his fussily constructed mind game movies, he's definitely a born con artist. And I also look at. I've also read, for example, your review of Transformers: Revenge of the Fallen, where you say. Why waste spleen on Michael Bay? He's a real visionary. Perhaps mindless in some ways, but Transformers Revenge of the Fallen is more proof he has a great eye for scale and a gift for visceral amazement. Bay's ability to shoot spectacle makes the Ridley, Tony, Jake Scott family look like cavemen. And so some people might actually have the opposite reaction. Some people might think that Christopher Nolan's a far more talented sort of filmmaker and has more attention to detail and composition than, say, a Michael Bay. I'm wondering if you can kind of sort of let us know a little bit more where you're coming from, if you can somehow characterize what you find the difference between, say, those two filmmakers are.
Oh, I'm coming from a position where I think that films are works of art and that they are primarily a visual work of art. That you don't need sound, but you have to know what you're doing with the images. And just from the word cinema, you got to be able to handle or execute kinetics. And those are the basics, visual composition and kinetics and movement. And you have to be able to, for me, you have to be able to do that in a way that is interesting. There are filmmakers, I think, like Michael Bay, who simply have a gift for that. And I think that's a rare gift, and I'm always impressed when I see it.
I'd ask you, how would you say? You said before that you don't like that Christopher Nolan doesn't say anything that speaks to the human spirit or spirituality or anything like that. How would you say that Transformers: Revenge of the Fallen speaks to humanity in a way that Inception doesn't?
It speaks to it speaks to the what I like to see in works of art, which is what I like to see in works of art is an acknowledgement of the human experience and how human beings deal with that. Michael Bay speaks to it not the way Ingmar Bergman does. He speaks to it in a Michael Bay way, which is to say he speaks to the human experience in the way of someone who grew up as an American, with the privileges of being a young American who enjoys technology, who enjoys machines, let's say even enjoys toys and games. But he also understands, he's able to express the experience of toys and games and American youth. That's very much a part of his aesthetic. He's able to express that in ways that also address contemporary issues, human issues, the issues of what technology does to us as human beings, how we are sometimes under its sway, how we are sometimes endangered by it, and also, very importantly, how it can be awesome. He's ambivalent about technology, as who isn't? Even in Antonioni's Red Desert, he's ambivalent about technological progress. That's a very human response. He isn't so mystified by it as I think Nolan pretends to be. Michael Bay is not so mystified by technological progress that he simply gives into it or simply sees it as all bad. He's fascinated. And that fascination, I think, comes through the way he photographs, the way he makes compositions, the way he appreciates scale, the way those transformers loom over us. And he's gotten really good at that. This is the same Michael Bay who did movies like Armageddon and Pearl Harbor, which I find kind of offensive and bad. But he's gotten better. He's progressed as an artist, and his art is oh God, it's close. It's close to finding its perfect expression in an odd genre like the Transformer movies. He doesn't express, as I repeat, he doesn't express human experience the way Bergman does. He does it like an American youth who has an ambivalent relationship to technology. And I wanted to say before that about that other question about the gift. The gift has to do with an ability. The filmmaking gift has to do with an ability to make great images, to make arresting images, and to make movement with images, to be rhythmic, because cinema is kinetics. And for me, a filmmaker has to have rhythm as much as a musician does. And I don't find that kind of composition an admirable compositional sense in Nolan's work, and I certainly never find rhythm in his work.
But I also wonder. Let's take another example. James Cameron's Avatar. I mean, how would you sort of stack those up together with how would you stack James Cameron's Avatar up against, say, Transformers: Revenge of the Fallen? Because I might argue that James Cameron. His ability to have a rhythm to his images and to sort of he's a very kind of classical filmmaker in terms of his style. That it exceeds that of Michael Bay, but that's a movie that you did not like in your review. Can you talk a little bit about? Basically, I'm just trying to figure out I read your reviews and I think they're very interesting, and I kind of want to try to figure out where you're coming from. When you say a movie like Avatar is not as perhaps enjoyable as a movie like Transformers: Revenge of the Fallen.
Well, I'm hoping that your confusion about my reviews is simply based on the fact that I'm being positive about one blockbuster rather than another, because I think these three films are each distinct.
Of course.
I think Transformers should not be confused. What Michael Bay does in Transformers should not be confused with what James Cameron is doing, even though they're both techies. They're doing very different things, and they're doing their different things differently. James Cameron, he's a techie. He's a tech head, and he puts a lot of sweat into achieving his special effects, and he's good at that. I think where it comes to expressing ideas through the cinematic apparatus, I think that's where he is immediately, obviously, less successful than Michael Bay, because James Cameron's ideas are not original. I would ask you to consider that Michael Bay having this ability to express an ambivalent, very American reaction to toys and technology is a unique thing. It's a particular point of view. With James Cameron, it seems to me, a movie like Avatar is simply about achieving the 3D and special effects in a way that is watchable perhaps plausible for the moment, and that's what he's really interested in. When it comes to how he dramatizes politics, that's where Cameron shows he has no mind at all. He just relies on cliches.
See, the thing is, I actually kind of agree with a lot of what you're saying about Avatar. So let's talk a little bit more about Inception, though. You were talking about how original Michael Bay's presentation of the ideas are, and I mean, I would also argue that Christopher Nolan's presentation of dreams and how the sort of impact they hold upon, the sort of the effect that they have on us, is quite original. The way he conceives of it, the rules that he establishes. Do you think that at all is worthwhile? Does that kind of factor into your calculus when evaluating how good the movie is?
Well, I would ask you to consider how original is it really, and in considering that, what we are obliged to do as people who are interested in popular culture, we are obliged to know that culture and to know something about how other artists have approached the dream topic, and then I would ask you to do the simple English class comparative literature thing.
Uh-huh.
And when Christopher Nolan says dream, I would ask you to say to him, ask of him, how does his idea of dreams compares with Kubrick's in Eyes Wide Shut? I would ask you to ask of Nolan and his movie, how does this concept of dreams compares with De Palma in Raising Cain? I would ask you to ask of Christopher Nolan in his movie, how does his concept of dreams compare with Louis Buñuel in Discreet Charm of the Bourgeoisie? I would ask you to ask of Christopher Nolan and his movie, how does his concept of dreams compares to Wes Craven's Nightmare on Elm Street? When you do that, it's not original at all. And when you do that, then you're on his level, if not above his level, because you're dealing with how dreams have been approached in the history of human culture, and people got there before Christopher Nolan did, and did a lot more interesting things with it. Christopher Nolan is begging for admission into the Dream Academy. Can we put it that way? But a bar has been set before I was born, before he was born, and he's got to rise to that level.
But why exactly does he have to rise to that level? This is, I mean, you're talking about the artist's, intent, his artistic capabilities, the way he fashions dreams as an artist. Why should he be judged against everything that came before? Especially since this is a very different movie than anything you just mentioned.
Yeah.
Well, is it? And he and really that was rhetorical. I don't think it is. And really, this holds for him. It holds for everybody. It holds for Kubrick. It holds for Buñuel. It holds for everybody. You can only appreciate a work of art by the standards that have been set before. Otherwise, everything is phenomenal. Everything is great, and that I'm sure we agree that just is not so. He has to be judged by what's gone before on his chosen topic and in his chosen style. Otherwise, just let's throw money at him and bow before him. But we can't do that because we're human beings with the culture, with the cultural tradition, and he's got to meet that.
Well, I guess I want to ask you about what is kind of your reaction when you see critics have been falling all over themselves to praise this film to an extent that I think.
But are they critics, or are they just shills? Seriously, are they simply bowing down for the newest thing? Because I think critics especially are beholden to know the history of the art form, and educated human beings are also beholden to know it and to take pleasure in it and to carry the light.
Right.
Every time they see a new work of art.
But you ascribe a lot of intention to some of what these artists are doing. Michael Bay we've talked about, and also Christopher Nolan. And I mean, isn't trying for something that's unique kind of worth something in and of itself? I mean, I might argue in response to what you said about these movies, for example, that Michael Bay wasn't necessarily trying to make a commentary on, the effect that consumerism has on us as Americans, that he's just trying to make a really bloated action movie, whereas Christopher Nolan was trying to get at a deeper truth about humanity, and they might have succeeded in their goals to varying degrees, but the fact that one is attempting something, in my opinion, far grander than the other makes it, to some degree, more praiseworthy than the other. I mean, again...
Well, why do you throw the word bloated into your Michael Bay description?
So, apologies for that.
I don't think we need to apologize. Like, as a filmmaker...
See, there you go. That's the bias there, and you're welcome to your bias.
There you go.
But I can only tell you, you have to compare these things to know what quality is.
Especially for Transformers 2. Like, I was a huge fan of Transformers 1, and I'm a huge fan of Michael Bay's big-ass, blow up everything filmmaking style. But it's funny how much he sort of moved back in Transformers 2, where, his camera movements, his action choreography just fell apart. He moved to the quick editing, movie music video style, rather than what he used to do. So that just seems strange.
I have to disagree with you. And I know we're just having a conversation, but I also have to caution you about using a cliche like music video editing. Because music videos are edited in, different styles according to what music video you're talking about.
Oh, for sure.
Yes.
Yeah. And also, music video editing has been adopted by commercial Hollywood wholesale. And you see that almost everywhere. I would argue with you that Michael Bay's editing is better than the cliche of music videos. Sometimes... in writing criticism, I try to make an argument. And sometimes I'm afraid, perhaps after I make the argument, the only way to convince some people is if we sat in front of a moviola and went through these films frame by frame. And I by the way, did that in graduate school. I've got training and experience in doing just that, and in watching movies as a result of that practice.
Yeah.
And I can say confidently that if we looked at Inception on a moviola, frame by frame, scene by scene, and did the same with Transformers, I could show you where Michael Bay has far more panache. Rather than simply talking out of my enthusiasm for it, I think I could demonstrate it.
All right. Well,
but since I don't have a moviola that I can sit in front of with every reader, I simply have to try to make a literary argument.
Right.
And my argument is based on what I see as a kind of visually kind of superior visual style in Michael Bay and a lesser visual style in Christopher Nolan, and whenever I can, I try to talk about that than simply speak out of my enthusiasm for what I see.
Well, let's talk about that, because I think Transformers 2, that's a movie that, it was a very big budget. It was a big sequel to the first film, which I think Michael Bay did a good job with his imagery there. The second one, his action style, he sort of lost the ability to show choreography. So I'm wondering, what you find superior there specifically.
Well, not only choreography, but I mean, I would argue, for example, I don't want this to become a Transformers Revenge of the Fallen discussion, but I would also argue, that, for example, the iconography of the first one was lost. It feels like Spielberg had more of an influence on the first movie than he did on the second film, and the action scenes, in my opinion, had far less of a sense of momentum and pacing, and it was far more difficult to understand where they were going in the second film. I mean, that's just my take on it, and so obviously I don't have the moviola in front of me, but
I remember the movie. Is there a specific scene in Transformers 2, Armond, that you think was just handled better in terms of compared to Inception?
Well, all of it was handled better compared to Inception for me, but we shouldn't talk about how we feel about it, how we feel what we might suspect Spielberg had to do with it or not, if we don't know.
No, we know. We know that Spielberg was heavily involved in Transformers 1, that the whole relationship between Bumblebee and the main character, that was him. Like the boy and his robot, that sort of love between the characters, that was Spielberg's influence in the first film. And he was gone.
You don't know Spielberg's influence on Michael Bay's compositions. You don't know that.
Well, we know he was working on Tintin the second time around, and he wasn't around to really keep an eye on Michael Bay.
All right, well, but that sounds to me like you've been reading up on the production, and really nobody knows what goes on in a production except the people who were producing, who were doing the production itself.
Oh, yeah, we're reporting on it. Yeah,
sure.
You can't trust that reporting. The only thing you can trust as a film watcher is what's in front of your eyes, because nobody truly knows what goes on behind the scenes of a film production or stage production. You can only talk about what's in front of your eyes. I think reading about the makings of movies is really harmful to the way it's harmful. To a pure and a pure response to a film, because you put too much extraneous stuff in your head when you've read so much about it. When I say you, I do mean you, but I mean it tends to be the way that people who like to read up about films respond to films. They've got everything in their heads but the film itself. You gotta throw all that stuff away, because it's all speculation and hearsay. You just simply have to look at the film as a work of art, and you have to respond to it as a work of art. And whatever is there has Michael Bay's name on it, and he's the guy, because his name is on it, he's the guy we have to assign all fault and praise to.
So you're following the auteur theory there.
Well, well, you can call it the auteur theory, but that's the way, to me, that's the way works of art work.
Yeah, but I mean, compared to like
whoever puts their name on it is the person who gets the credit or the blame.
Sure.
Everything else is extraneous.
But we know movies are collaborative.
Film is a very collaborative process. There's more than one name on a film. There's
the credits, the credits of a movie is more than just directed by.
I don't know if we want to get into. Let's not get into a discussion.
Well, okay, yeah. Well, we don't need to get into that. I think we ought to. I would hope that we can simply agree that certainly the way the Hollywood cinema works, that whoever is called the director, whoever gets that directed by card at the end of the credit sequence, is the person who signed off on everything we see. I mean, we can debate forever, but let's just simply accept the fact that if it says directed by, then that's the person we're going to praise, or that's the person we're going to blame. Otherwise, we're just talking in circles.
Yeah, I mean, you are technically right there, but the thing is, like, there are many films that directors don't want to really be attached to, but their names are still connected to it, or another director comes in at the behest of the studio and finishes the film. That happens quite often. In that case, it's kind of muddy.
Yeah. Well,
it's muddy. It's muddy. It happens, but I can't be bothered with that. That to me, all that is. That's to me that's stuff for Liz Smith or whatever that other woman's name.
All right, well, let's get
that's stuff for Liz Smith and Cindy Adams. I'm not interested in that. I'm interested in what's in front of me.
Let's get back to Inception.
Make sense of that.
Speaking of what's in front of us, let's get back to Inception. And I just wonder, I want to be sensitive of your time. We still want to talk to you afterwards, after the review, if possible. But one question I had is: do you find anything redeeming about Christopher Nolan's Inception? Is there anything praiseworthy about it? Because I mean, we have a lot of good things to say about it, and a lot of people have a lot of good things to say about it. We also have critical things to say about it. But I'm wondering if there's anything that you liked about the movie, and anything that you saw was promising.
Well, You asked me to talk about Inception, having read what I've written about other movies in the past, as well as other Christopher Nolan movies. So you have a pretty good idea about where I stand on Inception and on Christopher Nolan as a filmmaker. No, I see nothing positive in it. I see nothing positive in it. But what I want to say to you is, why do I have to?
No, I don't think.
There are plenty of movies out there to be enjoyed. I don't get my pleasure from Christopher Nolan. Even though as I said before, I often get disappointment from him, but I don't get any pleasure from him, and I don't feel the need to. I know that he has his fans, and they do get that pleasure, and that's what they can say. I can't say that. Before, I would not recommend this movie to anybody. I would, on the other hand, recommend another movie that's playing right now, and that would be the Alain Resnais film Wild Grass. And the way that Wild Grass deals with different states of consciousness and human experience, I think, is simply more complex and more mature and more visually pleasing than anything in Inception. The Christopher Nolan thing to me is, well, okay, I've made that point. Go ahead. Sorry.
Well, Adam,
I have a question.
Sure.
So you've already spoken to the fact that you don't think Inception succeeds on an intellectual level, or saying anything about the human experience. But do you think there's any value in a movie just that's strictly enjoyable on either a visceral level or just in terms of an entertainment value level? And would you agree that even if you don't think Inception is original in terms of its dreams, what it does with certain sequences, for example, towards the end of the film, layering, like having different locations set against each other with varying levels of time affecting each one, would you not agree that that's an interesting idea being explored on maybe from an action standpoint or from an entertainment value standpoint?
Nope. No. It's funny how time and editing has come to be viewed in contemporary popular culture. I think about a TV series like 24, and which uses its complicated narrative structure and its illusion of real time in ways that people find interesting. But that's not new either. So I would ask of you, as I ask of students when I teach, have you seen D.W. Griffith's Intolerance, which tells a story,
yep,
4 different stories in 4 different time periods, and intercuts them in very affecting and ingenious ways, and that movie is almost 100 years old.
But does what happened in each of those 4 different stories, did it actually directly affect what's happening on those different 4 different locations? Does it actually have an effect on each one? Like, are they all directly connected in that way?
Yes, and especially in its fugue-like climax, where Griffith brings a modern-day story, a Babylonian story, the Christ story, and a 17th century story of the French Huguenots, where he's editing them all together, sometimes in split seconds, and you feel it viscerally, but more importantly, in the story he's telling, which is about intolerance, you feel it spiritually. And this is 1916, I think, 1916. That's a great doggone achievement in the history of mankind. People need to know it. People who are impressed by Christopher Nolan, they need to know Intolerance. They need to know Griffith, and Nolan needs to know it. I'm not sure that he does, but that's how that. I mean, almost 100 years ago, dealing with states of consciousness, dealing with changes in time, and it's still brilliant. I promise you, if you go out and rent Intolerance today, you will be impressed by it.
I'm sorry. Go ahead, Armand. I didn't want to interrupt you.
No. Okay, just that.
I want to ask you. I think we should. Again, we should wrap this up pretty soon. But I want to ask you about Leonardo DiCaprio and his performance. Again, referring to some of your previous reviews, you wrote a review about Shutter Island. I don't think you hated it as much as Inception, but you weren't a huge fan of it. You wrote here in your review of Shutter Island, why is Martin Scorsese using CGI cadavers, mountain cliffs, and rainstorms in Shutter Island? Before he became resident window dresser for the Leonardo DiCaprio boutique, Scorsese looked like an artist. Now, every film he has directed since hitching himself to DiCaprio has been overweening, purposeless, and unoriginal. You also, to compare to compare that to another discussion, you wrote here about Jason Statham in September 2008. Jason Statham, who has the best track record of any contemporary movie actor, continues his winning streak with Death Race. What makes Statham special, that he's the era's most dependable action movie star, can be understood from the fact that his remake of the 1978 American International's picture cult film Death Race 2000 is a superior movie. Statham's not just the latest big screen badass, he's come to stand for quality product. None of today's media favorites can list so many films as good as Transporter, Cellular, Transporter 2, Revolver, Crank, War, and Death Race. So those are, I'm wondering what you think of Leonardo DiCaprio, and your views on Statham are well known. What do you think of DiCaprio's performance in this film, and how does he stack up against Jason Statham?
Well, Jason Statham does a particular kind of acting,
right,
that is different from Leo DiCaprio. Let's start here. They're both movie stars, meaning they are people who are fun to look at, and they are people who are fun to watch, for the way they look, for the way they move, for the way they speak. They're fun to look at. We can call them actors when they then can express human experience in a way that's credible, and not just agreeable, but in a way that's credible. And they're both good actors. But they're also both different kinds of actors. Jason Statham is primarily a physical actor. The way he moves is pleasing. The way he moves is expressive, and he works in genres that are kind of disreputable. And in that sense, he's kind of like well, I'll leave that said there. Leo DiCaprio is nice to look at. And sometimes, not all the time, sometimes the way he speaks and the way the faces that he makes are true to human experience that we all share and can recognize. But but it's not all. He isn't always successful at that serious kind of acting. Oh, dare I call it method acting, as opposed to Jason Statham's physical acting. Leo is all about interior psychological and emotional states, which come through his face and through his voice. Two different kinds of acting, and I just simply think, as you read, that Jason Statham has a better track record. He's been more successful at that. Leo's, as I said in the Inception review, he is certainly a movie star, but he's been making some bad movies lately, and I would say is wasting his talent. He gave an excellent performance in Catch Me If You Can. He gave an excellent performance in moments of the really deplorable Revolutionary Road. But as for the films he's made with Scorsese, I think Scorsese almost always miscasts him. I've never believed any of the emotions, I've never believed any of the faces that Leonardo DiCaprio makes for Scorsese. I certainly believe them in many moments of Revolutionary Road and all the way through Catch Me If You Can. I think the important point to make here is that we need to be careful about how we approach movies and make sure that we are as critical of big-budget prestige product as we are sometimes dismissive of low-budget action movies. I think this is an important distinction. People are easy to dismiss Jason Statham because his movies are never based on classical literature or bestsellers or books that people think are classy. And perhaps also people simply respond to some of Leo's movies and even a movie like Inception because it's got a super huge budget, an enormous ad campaign, and I think that also gets in the way of discerning whether or not it really is an effective work of art. Well, I'm not being provocative when I say that a movie like Transporter 3 is artistic or a movie like Death Race is powerful. I believe that they are, and I think they are more powerful than movies like Inception or Gangs of New York or Shutter's Island, which to refer to a critic that a lot of people love, Manny Farber. Leonardo has lately been making a whole lot of white elephant movies, movies that cost a lot, that carry a big load of prestige with them, but simply aren't all that effective.
I think that, first of all, I want to say we are huge Jason Statham fans here on the Slash Filmcast.
Yeah.
So it's not a thing where we think that those movies are below us to any degree. But I would argue that probably where the disconnect is that a lot of people think that Jason Statham and Leonardo DiCaprio are trying to do different things in their different movies, and that they both pretty much succeed. And I think you would argue that Leonardo DiCaprio doesn't succeed to the degree that he should.
He doesn't succeed.
Yep, go ahead.
I would say he doesn't succeed all the time. That's my real point.
Right.
I think it's important also, though, that we have that one's response to art be kind of pluralistic, and that you not just respond to one kind of movie, and that you be open to action films as well as to psychological dramas. And also, let me sneak a plug in for, if you're interested in psychological dramas, you should see what Jason Statham does in the movie London with Jessica Biel and Chris Evans. You guys know that one?
Yeah, I've seen it.
Huh?
I've seen it.
You have seen it? Oh, I don't hear any enthusiasm in that response. But I think I think London's a pretty good movie. Not a great work of art, but it's a pretty good movie, and it's a serious film.
Well, I want to go back.
Serious in the conventional meaning of serious.
I think actually your point there that you just made before you mentioned London was actually a good one that I think I actually agree with, and that is that we can appreciate these kind of different works of art for the different things that they attempt and how they succeed at them. If that's is that a good characterization? Yeah, and I think
sure.
Yep, go ahead.
Otherwise, really, Christopher Nolan would get no respect at all, because he essentially always works in what in another era would be called B-movie genres. It's just that he's got huge budgets, and I wonder sometimes if people simply aren't responding to the budget more than they are actually responding to the films. But Chris Nolan doesn't really make the kind of quote serious unquote films that Sam Mendes, who did Revolutionary Road, makes. I think probably before the Quentin Tarantino revolution, the kinds of movies that Christopher Nolan makes would have been sneered at by most critics. But there's been a change, and part of the change is that Christopher Nolan now works with enormous budgets, and gets the respect that in America people who have money almost always and unfairly get respect for. They get respect for the money rather than for what they can do.
I'm curious, if you're saying that you think people respond so positively to Christopher Nolan's films because of the budget, why do you think people responded so positively to Memento?
Well, that was back then too, also. But will you grant me that his fan base has grown along with his budgets? I would because
films get a lot more exposure the bigger budgets they have. Their studios have the ad campaign to advertise them.
Okay, but if you want to talk about what I think is wrong with Memento, we can do that. But it's because it's pretty much, for me, the simplest way to say that is that it's very similar to what I find is wrong with Inception, and that's as I said in my review, the con artist side of him, where he tries to set up complicated, tricky narratives, as if the trickiness itself was all that's necessary. Well, I guess for me, if you're just making a game, then trickiness is all you need. Tricky is all you need to be, but as I said before, I'm looking for movies that tell me something about the human experience, not just a tricked up narrative.
Do you not feel like Christopher Nolan is maybe by offering these films that, yes, maybe are a little bit gimmicky and they sort of try to trick the audience, but I would say, or I would argue that he's sort of offering a little bit of himself in that, and he's telling you about his human experience, because he's crafting these stories that he's trying to sort of play with what your expectations are for where the story is going to go. And actually in Inception as well, a lot of people have made correlations. Specifically, there's an article on Chud.com which sort of shows how the movie's almost biographical in terms of how Christopher Nolan autobiographical in terms of how Christopher Nolan sees filmmaking and sees how the mind works. And he's like, for example, in the film in Inception, like the character of Dom Cobb, played by Leonardo DiCaprio, he's sort of the director, and he's the one that is going through this artistic experience while there's this other side. The character of Mal, played by Marion Cotillard, is sort of the artistic side, almost destroying what he's trying to achieve.
But I mean, I think the general point, Adam, that you're making is that Nolan doesn't structure these movies to play tricks on the audience just to screw with them. I think he has something, deeper in mind. In Memento, it was to replicate the fractured memory of the protagonist. And in this movie, it might be a filmmaking allegory that Adam's talking about, that was written about at Chud.com, or it might be getting at the experience of dreaming. I don't think it's necessarily just a trick. I mean, what would you say to that, Mr. White?
Well, he he's clearly being autobiographical because he finally got a budget that would include Leonardo DiCaprio, his lookalike.
Right, that actually has been commented on before.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
Yeah.
I mean, that's just obvious, it seems to me. How honestly he's dealing with his own biography, I have no way of knowing. I don't no way of knowing. But I don't think that he's revealing anything particularly deep or important about the Cobb character, or even, and I guess even himself. If the nub of it comes down to he wants his daddy's approval, and he wants to hug his little teddy bear or whatever that thing was to his chest again, as he did in childhood, that's so sappy, and that is what used to be called dime store Freud. That's really not. That's not new. That's not really. It's not a revelation. And in terms of dream logic, I guess maybe everybody's dreams are different, but also in some ways, as Freud has told us, people's dreams are the same. And I wonder. I'm very suspicious that his idea of dreams are all negative, because not every dream is a nightmare. And I also wonder what's exactly. I don't think his pretense of dealing with dreams in a complicated way, I think, simply doesn't hold water, even if you compare him, and you need to compare him, if you compare Nolan to the way David Lynch handles dreams. I mean, David Lynch knows how to get to the different levels of psychological obfuscation. If you enjoyed Mulholland Drive, or you enjoyed Blue Velvet, really, you owe it to yourself to hold Christopher Nolan to that standard, and not simply take him at his con, because he simply doesn't understand dreaming the way David Lynch does. As far as the allegory for a film director goes, that's often fun to say about a filmmaker, but in this case, I don't think it takes us very far. I would recommend you guys see a movie which sometimes shows on Turner Classics, called Paris When It Sizzles, where William Holden plays the screenwriter, and Audrey Hepburn plays the secretary, and the entire film is William Holden devising different movie scenarios, and these scenarios reflect his attraction to this new young secretary he's hired. I mean, that's clever stuff. And really, once you know that stuff, I promise you will find what Christopher Nolan does insufficient.
Adam, here's what I want to expand a little bit on the theme, because I feel like you're sort of diminishing what Christopher Nolan was trying to achieve, and what I personally think he succeeds at achieving. With the character of Cobb, what he goes through, the entire experience, and the way it mirrors filmmaking, I think at the end, is sort of speaking to this element. Okay, so the movie lingers on this question of like, what is reality and what isn't? And as you can say, that's not exactly the most interesting or original theme, but I would say the way that it's supposed to mirror filmmaking or cinema is that you also have this element of there's an emotional catharsis that a certain character has, and then you eventually see that happen to the protagonist. And it's a question of, even if it's not real, does it still retain value? Does it still actually mean something? And it's sort of mirroring that to when you watch a movie. Is that value, is that emotional catharsis, even if that's not really real, even if what you're seeing is strictly a visual or visceral experience that doesn't ultimately reflect reality, is there still value in that? And that's what I would argue that Christopher Nolan was trying to do with Inception. What would you say to that?
Oh, well, that isn't effective to me. What I found almost interesting, though not quite, in the movie, was that part of the story where they come upon people who are. It's almost as if they came upon an opium den, and there are these people who are just dreaming to dream. And I think they said something about they want to be awakened, even, and that gave me, during that scene I was thinking. Okay, so he's dealing with the way people get addicted to pop culture. The same way people get addicted to drugs and opium, and I thought, but he's saying that, but I can't see that he's doing anything with it, and I can't say that he's doing anything except perhaps indulging a kind of addiction to pop culture that takes you away from being engaged with life. And I would argue that if you make dreams and dreams only the content of the film you are making, then that is also a way of disengaging with real life. It's a way of drugging people, Christopher Nolan drugging his fans, drugging his audience. He isn't dealing with the basic nature of human relationships. And my God, do we want to talk about how he feels about women? And I'm not saying that he needs to be a PC about that either. It's just that the women in his movies are, in some ways, I think, always frightening and repellent. And I got to say, I think that's kind of, if that's all he can see, that's kind of immature. And I do see a kind of immaturity. I do see immaturity in the way that Christopher Nolan relies on games and trickery.
Well, that statement about women, that wasn't really true for either of the Batman movies or Insomnia. It's just certain films where, it's the femme fatale that he's relying on.
Well, it's true of this one.
Yeah,
it's true of Memento,
right.
and I didn't particularly think that the women in the Batman movies were at all prepossessing. I think the image of women in the Batman movies is
they were ciphers. They were comic book female characters who didn't really have much personality of their own. But yeah.
So I mean, he doesn't do dreams the way Buñuel or Bergman or David Lynch did, and they don't. And in their dream movies, women especially are fascinating figures, and that is an expression of Buñuel, Bergman, and David Lynch's adult involvement with the female being. You don't get that from Christopher Nolan. I think it's fair. I think it's fair to say, without sounding too harsh, that he makes adolescent movies, and adolescent movies can be enjoyed by adolescents. I'm not an adolescent anymore. I don't enjoy them, and guys, that's probably the nub. If I were a teenager, I would probably find what Christopher Nolan does to be of great interest. I'm just not a teenager anymore, and I've seen so many movies that deal with dreams in a way that is really useful in my own adult experience.